Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Tech Talk. I am your host, Jeff Hootselle. If you guys have watched our show before, you know we talk to technology leaders from all across the country in all different walks of life. We've always got some really fantastic guests on the show. Today in particular, we've got a great guest, really one of the cloud computing pioneers in the industry. Been in the market for over 20 plus years. He's also a best-selling author of over 13 books. He's had 5,000 articles published in magazines and websites like Forbes and Inc. You're really a globally known technology thought leader. We're really excited to have him today. He's the Chief Cloud Strategy Officer from Deloitte. We've got David Linthicum. David, welcome to the show, buddy.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man, I could have spent like another 20 minutes reading your bio on here. You got a pretty good background. You're doing cloud before it was cool. Yeah. I didn't get your high school superlatives or anything in there, but we'll work on that. I'll try and bring it out.
Yeah, I was a failure in high school, so that'd be very quick.
So, David, the one thing that's really unique about your background is just the amount of time you've been in the space in the cloud industry. Really, before it was probably called cloud, right? I mean, how did you kind of get yourself started in this space, and why did you decide to kind of seek that out as a path to go down?
Yeah, when I was a CTO at Saga Software, which was Software AG Americas, back in the late 90s, I just wrote a book called Enterprise Application Integration, and was building an enterprise application integration tool, basically to mediate data and move things in between ERPs and databases, things like that. Now it's a huge industry. And I was kind of taken back with the fact that we had to spend about $1 million in hardware software to get these things up and running. And what if we could deliver the same service through some sort of a multi-tenant time sharing system over the open internet and kind of bring that to the next level? And at the time, there were application platforms, kind of the early versions of software as a service that were around, things like that. So people were starting to look at the online stuff. Put together a couple of concept papers around what that would look like, how to do the architecture, how to do the tenancy, which was kind of new at the time, and just pushed it out there. And no one cared. So held on to that for a while, went off, became CTO of another integration company called Mercator, and then left that company after it was sold to IBM a few years later to go join a startup called Grand Central, and we did the integration as a service stuff. And that's where we got the deep dive into what integration means, what cloud computing means. And certainly the SaaS players were emerging at the time. And then the notion was, what if we deliver resources or infrastructure over the open internet, storage, compute, things like that. And obviously some of the bigger players started to emerge in the market. I think we had 19 at the time. And that's since normalized to the big three: Amazon, Google, and Microsoft.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch it go. I mean, now you talk about cloud, and it's like, oh, of course you would do that. It's such a great place to be, and it's so critical to how businesses are building their infrastructure. But 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't necessarily the case. So I know now you're speaking at a lot of events, maybe more virtual than in the past, and doing podcasts. I know you do LinkedIn Learning and different things as well. So you're kind of all over the place, and I know a lot of the topics you talk about are things that are trending in that world. Giving advice to CIOs on how to build out their strategies, how to deal with some of the challenges and issues around, migrating to the cloud. It's something that comes up quite a bit for us. We host a CIO roundtable here in town as well, and I know we had one the other day talking about cloud strategy, and some of the feedback that continues to come back from these companies, really small and large, is, hey, this is a lot more complex than we thought it was. Just the process of doing the migrations on it. I'm curious, as you're kind of consulting and talking with companies like that, what kind of guidance are you giving them, or how are you telling them to approach kind of building out that strategy and that roadmap to make that migration happen?
Yeah, the big one is going to be focused on the planning, which is a kind of a lost art over the last 20 some odd years. The fact of the matter is, you're absolutely right. When you deploy any sort of heterogeneous distributed platform, and that's what cloud computing is, the planning aspect of it becomes even more critical. And so you need to figure out how everything's going to fit together, what things are going to work together, get some of our testing platforms, figure out how you're going to deal with DevOps and development capabilities, figure out how you're going to deal with deployment and security, governance, how you're going to have common services such as security and governance. All these sorts of things, which are various moving parts that have to be thought of holistically at the enterprise level. Before you start to dwell in the cloud, there needs to be some sort of common vision, common strategy, common set of services. And that's hard. When you get into an architecture stuff, and I've been an architect, by trade for the last 35 years, you're dealing with typically a much smaller problem domain with just a few systems that you're configuring together to make the solution. When you deal with cloud computing, you're migrating some stuff, you're building net new. You have the traditional systems that have to work and play with the cloud-based systems. And so the complexity is so overwhelming that you have to sit down and take each domain one to one and work through each domain systematically to figure out how do you make it happen and then roll it out the same way. So in other words, we're not going to boil the ocean. We're going to get these certain applications out on the cloud in this period of time, and they're going to leverage these common services, and that's going to be the standard that we move through going forward. We're going to move to a multi-cloud environment, leveraging these brokering services, these infrastructure monitoring services, those sorts of things. So it's a big, geeky problem to solve, and I think that's where people get held up on.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious, are you seeing kind of 2 or 3 kind of most common mistakes that most folks are making? Maybe mistakes, maybe a strong word for it, but just things they may overlook in the front end. I mean, you always hear the stories of, well, we didn't anticipate the cost. We kind of budgeted for X, and then we made the migration, and we saw our bill, and it was Y. Or, we wanted to move this application over, and everything was cloud first, but it didn't work, or we just didn't approach it right. What are the 2 or 3 things that you see most commonly where people kind of get tripped up?
I think the big thing is going to be cost of migration, cost of relocation of systems, and the actual cost of the cloud. So we spent years, since the cloud, kind of emerged in popular culture, say 2009, when NIST wrote the definition of cloud computing, as talking about the cost efficiencies of cloud. In fact, it's OpEx versus CapEx, and it's going to be an easier deal to move systems there. It's going to be pay as you go as a service. It's going to be always cheaper and better and things like that. Well, it is if you do certain things right, and you have to kind of understand in a realistic way where you're moving into. I mean, it sounds like the folks who are, giving you feedback on where they, messed up in moving to the cloud. They just didn't think through a lot of the things in more realistic ways. Probably didn't get the advice they needed to understand exactly what the cost impact's going to be, in moving that stuff forward. So it's really getting to the reality of the fact that we're dealing with costs, we're dealing with complexity, we're dealing with training, we're dealing with skill sets, we're dealing with cultural changes, all these sorts of things that have to be understood before you start moving into the cloud.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of the getting good advice from this. I mean, that's, I think, one of the challenges we uncovered, and it's, again, another comment that came up the other day is, you want to look out there, and obviously we talked in the beginning about you have a couple decades of experience in this space. It's pretty unique, right? I mean, most people we talk about, hey, we need an AWS developer, or this coding specialty, or whatever technical discipline you need some expertise in. There's just not a lot of those people out there, right? At least not a lot of folks that have a long track record of experience. So as companies look to make this migration, they don't have large talent pools in their internal staff. What's your best guidance for how they approach that and how to make sure they're getting the right advice and getting comprehensive advice on what to do?
Well, nobody knows everything about everything. So you have to get a team of people that have different specializations. And what I like to do is when I get a team together in terms of doing a cloud migration or doing a digital transformation or moving an enterprise into more advanced technologies, better technologies that typically includes the cloud, you get a security person, you get a governance person, you get a compliance person, you get a database specialist, you get all these people with generalized skills as to what their realistic anticipations are. DevOps is another one, to move into the cloud, and you have them work together to form a common solution and provide common realistic expectations of what they can accomplish over a certain period of time. And you got to remember, those are generalists still. And so even the generalists would need people who understand AWS specific stuff, Microsoft specific stuff, Google specific stuff, DevOps engineers, and people who are tool chain specialists, those sorts of things. You set this hierarchy, what I call a dream team, to in essence, I'll have most of the skills and the talent you need to bring to bear to make sure you're making right decisions. And that's critical, because if you make a wrong decision, you're going to have to hit the reset button 2 or 3 years down the road, and that's going to be incredibly expensive. You're going to have to stop momentum, go back and fix stuff, and then start moving forward. So my advice to everybody moving into the cloud is splurge on training, splurge on hiring, splurge on leveraging the right consultants that you need to get it right the first time. And it's possible to get it right the first time as long as you have the talent you need to understand where you're moving.
Yeah, I think you're right. So David, I'm curious, we're getting into full swing in 2021 right now. I know you're obviously having a lot of these thought leadership conversations. What are the couple big trends that you're kind of seeing this year? We've had our year of the pandemic. We had all the conversations about how people shifted and went remote, and we're kind of into this area where people are kind of looking forward now. What do you see as the couple big trends you're going to be looking at for 2021 for some CIOs out there to start thinking about?
Well, the big one was continuation of the migration boom that occurred last year as people realized there was risk in having information systems on premise in private data centers. In many instances, they couldn't get into the data centers because of quarantines. However, people in the cloud did much better, and the cloud stuff was able to scale, so people were pushing into migrate. And so we're going to see continue migration in the cloud in 2021. Other things we're going to see is the rise of edge and micro cloud computing. So private clouds are still out there, but it's even more popular to leverage things such as AWS Outpost or Microsoft Stack to have micro clouds that exist on premise to serve what private clouds needed to do, and that seems to be a big push moving forward. The edge IoT stuff is still growing, and then ultimately, as we're moving out into a multi-cloud kind of a world, and 94% of the people who are deploying to the cloud are typically leveraging more than one cloud brand, public cloud brand, is dealing with the fact that we're going to have an enormous number of services under operations because these dev teams are picking these different services as best of breeds on these different clouds. And so we're left with a huge amount of choice to pick the right technology to solve the problems, be creative and innovative. But that's causing a complexity issue that we're going to have to figure out as well. And I think people are understanding that, looking for methods and tools to mitigate that.
Oh, that's great. Well, David, it's awesome having you on here. I feel like we could go like an 8-part series and dig into all these different things. But hey, for folks that want to learn more, want to connect with you, want to hear more about the books and articles and teaching and things that you're doing, what's the best way to folks to kind of follow you and get in contact with you?
Well, I blog on InfoWorld twice a week on cloud computing. Go to infoworld.com. Check out my blog there. On Cloud Podcast, which is you can search on iTunes and find that, and that's Deloitte Podcast. And just keep Googling me. I write and speak, publish 3 or 4 times a week, and do a podcast once a week. So I stay out there. Please leverage me as you need to.
All right, you heard it. He's everywhere. David, buddy, thank you so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate you taking some time out this morning.
Thank you, man.
All right. Hey, and thank you guys for joining us as well for another Tech Talk. If you want to see more episodes like this, you can check us out at automax.com, and you can find us also in podcast form wherever you subscribe to your favorite podcast. Thanks and take care.